Yes, I'm ready.
Hi, everybody. I am defense lawyer Rachel Kugel, and this is Rachel Defends You. Today, I am super lucky to have an incredible guest with me today who I know you guys are going to totally love and appreciate and be asking for more with. And that is Erica Martini. Great name, by the way, for this show. Erica Martini. I love it. um, she is
Appropriate.
here. She has an incredible channel that she's working on. She's a great content creator. The channel is called The Ghetto Streets of Idaho, Stories of Our People. It's a work in progress, but you definitely have to check it out because over time there's going to be more and more content coming out from her. And she is telling an untold story about what it's like to live in middle America and what's really going on out there. You know, I am from New York City and we all have heard stories and movies about New York City, but what's really going on in America day to day, what's really impacting the American people, the American justice system, you know, real American people is something that Erica can speak to personally and will tell you some incredible stories that will knock your socks off, make you laugh, and I think also learn something as well. So she's really doing incredible things. Where our interests align is that Erica is unabashedly authentic and honest and willing to tell stories, you know, about her own life and lives of her friends and people that she knows in the community. And that's, I think, where our
Mhm.
interests are aligned, because what I'm here to do is to tell these stories, to hope that people can learn from them, to hope that people can see a lot of things. One, that you're not defined by your worst day. And two, what the justice system can really be about and how to get through it with grace and come out the other side. So thank you so much with that introduction. Thank you so much for joining me, Erica. And
No, thank you. That
please,
was so much for all
oh,
those
good.
nice words.
I'm so excited I know a little bit about your story in preparation for this, and
Mhm.
I'm so excited to hear about it. You're on today to share with us how you were falsely accused of DWI and what that process
Mhm.
was like. Because we were talking before we hit record, and I was trying to explain to you that because you and I know, because we've been in the system on different sides, but we've been in the system.
Mhm.
And we know that it's possible for a convergence of things to happen between bad luck, bad policing, corruption, poor
Mhm.
training, and a desire to get people can all kind of come together and
Mhm.
really create a situation where good people can be caught up in the system. So with that, could
Correct.
you tell us a little bit about what happened to you and we can have a great conversation about it?
It was the oddest experience. A friend and I were driving, and I was driving, he was the passenger. I was pulled over because my license plate was hanging askew.
Oh,
That's
sounds
it.
sounds so
And
dangerous what you were doing, reckless driving.
I would say within 3 minutes of the officer coming up to the car, we were asked to vacate the
Mm,
vehicle, to exit the vehicle
mhm.
and let him do a search. And
Wow.
um, I didn't think that, I knew there was nothing in the car,
Mhm,
maybe a crushed up old beer can underneath the seat,
mhm.
but I hadn't been drinking that day. And we both got out of the car, stood on the sidewalk.
You
He
agreed
searched through
to
the
the
car.
search.
Yes, and where I live in Idaho, and you are pretty much, we know that we have rights,
Mhm.
but we're scared out of them.
You're scared of the by the police and how they act towards you, you're saying.
Yeah, well, if we try to bring it up, no,
Mhm.
or these are our rights, then it becomes we're in more trouble.
I think that's two interesting points right there that are important for people to hear. One is that, you know, legally, because, you know, again, the system jurisprudence, like from a lawyer standpoint, is different than reality for individuals in the street in the
Mhm.
moment. And so you can have legal rights. I could sit here and tell you exactly, you know, the citation, what your legal rights are in that situation. And yet those legal rights can feel essentially illusory or meaningless to you because you feel you don't really have them. It's like a duress or a coercion you feel from previous interactions or the way an officer is dealing with you. You
Definitely.
don't really have a choice. a meaningful choice.
Exactly.
The other thing I think is interesting too about this is that, I mean, already in your story, is that it's important for people to know that the more you're like a good person, and I say that as like a term of art, everybody's a good person. I don't mean it, but you're a good person who didn't foresee yourself as committing a crime. And so
Mhm.
you're much more likely to like acquiesce and agree, right? Because if
Yeah.
you were a real criminal, if you had a body in the trunk, you wouldn't,
Yeah.
you know,
You
you
would
wouldn't
say
agree.
no.
Right, exactly. So I think that's also important for people to know, because good people, generally law-abiding good people in the community, are gonna respond to police, at least initially. Now, you've probably learned a lot
Mhm.
since that time and you might feel differently today, but
Mhm.
are going to respond with acquiescence toward police, whether that's about
Yep.
making statements or letting them search. And I think that's important for people to realize, A, you have rights and you can exercise them. And B, uh, good people sometimes don't know how to be criminals. They don't know how to cover stuff up or say no to,
Mhm.
to a search. So I think that's also like two interesting points that have already been
Yeah.
illuminated.
It gets even better.
Okay.
He sat there and went through the car and did find one old beer can and
Mm-hmm.
shoved underneath like the track of the seat.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was calling, like running my plates, I have a salvage title on my car, and I have been told that it is to be impounded. And
Got it.
he didn't care about that. He just
Hmm.
wanted to get something else
Okay.
on me. And he pulled me aside and asked me to do the field sobriety.
Okay.
And this is where my health conditions come in.
So
I
based on
have,
finding that one beer can, you're now
yes,
out of the car. Now you haven't, and it's important for people to realize there's been no erratic driving,
no,
right? You were pulled over for what is, I guess,
right.
technically,
License
yeah,
plates, this,
technically a
that's it.
violation, but certainly a pretty minor one, having nothing to do with danger,
Mhm.
recklessness, or moving. Because again, I think it's a misconception. People picture, they hear DUI and they picture somebody driving like a crazy person, being dangerous. So you've done nothing dangerous. They find one old empty beer can, and that
Mhm.
now you're off to the races, and he's asking you to do
Mhm.
standardized sobriety tests.
So I suffer from anemia,
Mm-hmm.
and I had um, just been in and out of the hospital getting blood transfusions.
Mm.
And I have neuropathy and a vein disorder in my legs that make my legs gigantic, swelling at times.
Wow.
And so I guess I maybe looked tired and drained out. And he kept asking me if I was under the influence of anything. And I told him no.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure you haven't smoked any marijuana? Are you sure you haven't smoked any marijuana? And I'm like, no, this is just the way I look. I I don't have
I'm
enough
just a
vitamins.
chill
I don't have enough
person.
food.
Like,
Well, I look drained a lot because of the lack of
yeah,
blood and vitamins.
sure, sure.
And
Right. You could be
and then
tight,
when
lose
you're
that
late,
nail, right?
yeah. Um, so I guess that could make me look like I was stoned.
Hmm.
And then I have neuropathy in my feet, and I can't stand on 2 feet normally,
Sure,
let
sure.
alone on one foot.
Right.
And I explained that to them.
Oh, you
I
did
did.
tell them in the moment. A lot of times people don't have the wherewithal and they don't, again, they're nervous, which is part
Yeah.
of this too. Now you're on the side of the road, nervous, whatever. What time of day was this?
It was like 10 o'clock at night, maybe.
Oh, so not 2 in the morning or anything like that. Right.
No, it wasn't. And they wanted me to do it in the road. And I
Mm,
said, I'm not doing it in the road because
good
I'm
for
gonna
you.
fall when he asked me to get on one foot.
Hmm.
And he called another officer, and they walked me over to where there was a grassy area and let me try to do the stand on one foot, walk a straight line test. And I told them, both of you guys better stand on the other side of me because I will fall down.
Hmm.
I don't have, I can't feel my feet
Jeez.
at all.
Was there video? Were they videotaping?
I believe so.
Hmm.
And I did all the
Logic.
tests
Right.
and the eye test.
Fingered
And when it came to, like hold, like standing on one foot,
right.
I refused to do it then.
Okay.
Not so much refused, but told them I'm incapable of doing
No,
that.
you are. This is another point I think to make. My caveat here is so I'm not an attorney in Idaho. I practice in New York and New Jersey. However, for the most, I think across the board, people should know that you generally can refuse that type of test. So it's not the same thing as refusing, let's say, a breath test later and getting an additional charge for refusal. You can refuse to do a field sobriety test. You're not forced to give evidence against yourself. Now, whether or not that refusal can be used against you in court is some states might vary. Whether or not that the police can then arrest you. Do they have probable cause if the person doesn't, participate? So they might, but the reality is most
Yeah.
of the time they would have been arresting you anyway at that point. Like you're doing those tests. People think that they're going to do, again, this goes back to the good people wanting to acquiesce to police officers. You feel like I want to do, here's this authority figure asking me to do something. I'm not a criminal. I want to comply. I want to show them I'm compliant. Maybe I'm afraid of them. I don't want them to shoot me, whatever. So I'm going to try to comply. And you don't realize that what they're really doing, they've already decided that you're impaired.
Yeah.
And what they're really doing is gathering evidence against you. They want
Yeah.
you to fall over. They want you to not be able to do it. And they want video evidence of that happening. Right.
And after that, the test where I was walking and looking at my nose and my eyes, they gave me a breathalyzer,
Right there on the scene or at the station?
Yes, at this
Yeah. So some states have a PPT or court order.
0.00 is
Wow.
what
So
I
you
blew.
blow zeros. Okay.
0.00.
And let me
And
guess, they
then,
don't let it go at that. They determine, well,
no,
she's
they do
zero,
not.
zero, and we're still seeing something. So there must be drug in
We know you're under the influence of
something.
something.
You're on
We know
something.
it. And we want you to come into the station, the police
Mhm.
station, have a blood test done, and have somebody who's more trained with field sobriety
Called a
testing.
DRE, a drug recognition expert. It's a here's what it really is: a police officer who's taken an extra class. And they
And
basically do so just because I know people that are listening, you and I know what it is, but maybe people that are listening aren't going to know.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I'd never.
So it's a cop who's taken an extra class, and essentially
Okay.
what they are doing, and it's really there's a lot of controversy around this program. It's called the DRE program, Drug Recognition Experts. And
Okay.
they're going to do these field sobriety tests again, and then they're also going to do some what feels like quasi medical stuff, like maybe take your blood pressure, maybe take your temperature, and they're
Yes.
going to then come to some conclusion of what drug you're on. But here's the thing, it's a rigged thing, and I'll tell you why it's a rigged thing, because by the time they're coming in, the police officer who's been with you before is already telling them, I think she's on marijuana. She has said maybe she's made this statement, or I found this thing, or whatever, the individual's position might be. So he's not really, it's not a completely like neutral thing where he's doing these tests and coming up with the magical answer that someone's on marijuana. He's doing these tests with the belief already that you're under the influence of marijuana, and how can I make these two things maybe fit together?
So that, yes. I went to the police station. I was both me and my passenger were patted down. Um, it was a male officer, and he just went at it to pat me down.
Yeah, they should have a
before I was
matron, a
like,
female officer.
are you gonna call for a female? And he said, do I need to, or do you mind if I do it?
That feels traumatic.
And I said, well, it's okay. You know, you can do
Again,
it.
trying to be compliant. You're trying to
Well,
be easy.
but for him to automatically just have assumed it's all right
Yeah.
to do
No.
that when it's not was wrong.
And obviously it's something that years later still, like, when you're telling the story, that's a piece that popped out for you. And like in the grand scheme of an arrest, that's like a nothing part of the arrest. And yet it still sticks out for you. So the reality is, again, you're trying to be compliant and easygoing and nice to this authority figure. But the reality is it did bother you, and it wasn't cool. And it's really not appropriate what they did. Yeah.
So I went back, I was put in handcuffs. put in the back of the police car. They let my friend drive off in my car. Thank
Wow.
God, didn't get impounded.
Right.
And they come and one guy takes my blood.
Mm-hmm.
And then the gentleman that came to do the more
The DRE, right?
detailed, yeah, he was actually very nice.
Mm-hmm.
He looked at me and saw my legs
Mm,
and was like, holy cow,
right.
I know that's swollen legs.
Mm-hmm.
My wife had two children. I've never seen anybody's legs swell up that bad.
Wow.
And I'm explaining to him my medical conditions. And I think he got it a little
Mm-hmm.
bit and he was more understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't even, now I can feel my heart myself beating out of my chest almost,
Mm-hmm.
but he can't even find my pulse from the beginning, because
Because he's a police
you know,
officer who's taken an extra class.
he had a hard time all the time. And so about 2 hours of testing I went through.
Wow.
And, um, I did do the standing on one leg and walking there.
He had you do
It,
that even with your medical issue with the neuropathy that
yes,
was
and
visible and obvious. Unbelievable.
yes, and I had blacked out from my anemia like less than a month ago, and been in the hospital and had blood transfusions.
Before this.
And yes, before this, and I was starting to feel like that again.
Mm,
And they kept asking me if I needed to be, do you want us to call the ambulance? Do you want us to call the ambulance? And
hmm.
no, not unless I'm going to jail. Then I want to go to the hospital.
Yeah, yeah. Hell yeah.
But I didn't feel well.
Yeah.
And I was just wore out and tired, and my body was still trying to build itself back up.
And
And
by this point, you said it's like 2 hours in. It's got to be after midnight by this point.
yes, it was. And then a lot of the eye tests with your
Yeah.
pupils, which I thought was really weird because I was put into a room, the lights were
Yep.
turned off with two male officers and me for
So another
like,
moment where you felt
mhm.
uncomfortable and yeah.
I'm guessing that they were recording because they have you look at the red lights of the camera,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's appropriate to be alone in a room with no lights with two male
Right.
officers.
It's very scary for sure. I can see why
And
that would
yeah.
add to the trauma of the whole thing for sure.
Mhm. And he couldn't determine whether it was
Okay.
medical or intoxication,
Hmm.
or under the influence.
Right.
And he called his supervisor, and
Hmm.
I overheard them saying, because she's just gone out of the hospital,
Hmm.
even if you took blood or you take her to the hospital, because they just wanted to take me like with an officer to the hospital
Uh-huh.
and still have me detained or arrested,
Hmm.
that I would come back with such a cocktail of
Right. Because
medications and drugs
it's
in my system
so
that
I
they
think
wouldn't be
that's
able to tell.
yeah, and I think that's an important point also for people because again, you and I know, but other people that are listening might not, and I want people to like learn from this is, the other thing to know is, and what you're pointing out is when you're talking about DWI drug allegation versus DWI
Mhm.
alcohol. So alcohol is obvious, right? Most states it's 0.08. I think all states it's 0.08 at this point,
Yeah.
in terms of the legal limit. And you can look fine, act fine, and be fine. But if you blow 0.08 or higher, that's enough to be technically guilty. It's called a per se limit that's in the law. With drugs, and this is becoming more and more important now that marijuana is legalized in a lot of states and stuff, with drugs, there's no per se limit. And many states can get, like New York, where I am, for example, and probably Idaho too, we can get back, although blood would be a little better, but we can get back a test that would show the presence of THC or the presence of,
Mhm.
a benzo or whatever the situation might be, but it doesn't show specifically how much or whether it's affecting you right now. So blood is going to be a little better because blood is generally still running through your system. Urine,
Yes.
most states use urine. Urine by its very nature is garbage. The urine is out of your body. It's not affecting you anymore. It's not blood. So there's a big difference between blood and urine in testing, and a big question about how long drugs stay in your body, certain kinds of, and whether they're still affecting you. So what, because it's not illegal to have been on a benzo in the hospital a month ago. It's illegal to be drinking or impaired or drug impaired while driving. And that was the issue I think they were pointing to, was their concern with you that, hey, she's just been hospitalized. She was on a cocktail of things in the hospital. We don't even know what. Some of those things might still show and color our results for better or for worse. So anyway, I know you know a lot of that, but I'm just kind of for the
I don't
listening.
know. I'm learning a lot here because
Oh,
I
good.
gave my blood.
Okay.
I admitted that, yes, I had drank, like days before,
Right, right.
or and I had to take a lot of medications and stuff. And I
Yeah.
don't know if that still shows in my blood and if they
Hmm.
can tell if it was that day or 2 days
Right.
ago.
Right, right.
It is still scary for me because they told me it would be a month before the blood test
Correct.
result came back.
At a minimum,
And
at a minimum. In New
and so
Jersey, it
I'm
takes 6 months. New York, I mean, at a minimum. Yeah,
still nervous that they could charge me with
sure.
something.
So they let
And
you go that day uncharged.
yes, they
Okay.
deemed it a medical issue
Uh-huh.
and think that I needed to be arrested or detained to the hospital.
Okay, so that's wonderful. So eventually,
Yeah.
cooler heads prevailed and you weren't charged. And how long ago was all that?
A month, just
Okay.
maybe less, maybe
Okay.
more.
Okay.
And
So we're hoping
scared.
that,
So
that's
I'm
still the
getting
case.
scared about the
Right,
results because
right.
I
Yeah.
don't.
So there are things like statute of limitations, for example, where I don't know what it is in Idaho. I'd have to look it up. But there are, they can't kind of, you can't live your life with it hanging over you for forever. And I think, it sounds to me like you had a really bad night, but unfortunately, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Because like if we go back through it and we think about what actually happened, and this is like I wanted to like take it apart, is like what actually happened was they observed no erratic driving, no indicia of impairment. They pulled you over solely for a license plate violation. That means to me that you were otherwise driving well. You received no tickets, right?
Nope.
No tickets. So they didn't they put on their license sirens, you pull over safely and appropriately. They come
Right.
up to you, they communicate with you. For some reason, and maybe this is the part that immediately starts to feel unfair. For some reason, they immediately ask you to search. Why? Why? That's an
Mhm.
open-ended question for us. Like, why do they immediately look at you and look at your passenger and say, can we search? Do they do that to everybody? Is it time of night?
It could have been the passenger was on felony probation,
So maybe they saw that and it was guilt by
and
association.
I think that the law enforcement here just, wants that raise, wants that
Right. So they
promotion,
just,
and let's
and
see.
you know what, that's an important point too, especially when it comes, I mean, obviously maybe they were hoping to find something bigger, like, possession of something more serious.
Mhm.
But, with DUI, if it's called in Idaho, you know, police officers get awards for it. So
Really.
there's a real incentive to be out there looking for it. So there's a couple things that happen. Number one, overtime, right? A lot of places will give police overtime for their involvement in your now arrest and trial. So if I'm a cop and I was about to get off of duty at 10,
Oh.
instead I arrest you, now I got 3 extra hours of overtime. And if it ends up going to court, I might have even more. So there's that financial incentive. Same with DREs. They get called in. That's an additional financial benefit that a DRE gets by doing that training and being called in. But
Interesting to know.
yeah, and then secondarily, there's programs like MAD, for example, which I have no, who wouldn't be? I'm a mother and I'm against drunk driving. Like, okay, I mean, you say it in such a way that no one could be on the other side of it. Mothers against drunk driving. Yes, oh, sign me up. Okay, but what you don't realize is that it's also a lobbying group. It's also a group that behind the scenes is doing things where they're giving awards and they're giving incentives. And if you look and you Google and you see your local community, you'll see that there's Facebook posts of officers like receiving an award from Matt. So it becomes this thing of how many arrests you have, and you're the top DUI guy. So there's an incentive to be out there looking for it. The other thing I
It's
wanted to touch on is
definitely
it's,
what's drugs here.
yeah, and
Drugs.
it's politically a great issue because, as I just kind of said with the Matt thing, like even you and I would not be pro drunk driver, right? I mean, if you put it that way, right? Nobody's pro drunk driver. And so it's a way that there's almost a DUI exception to the Constitution because it's just so politically, like other types of crimes, drug crimes, robbery crimes, all, there's political groups that will get behind people and say, well, there's all these reasons for this type of crime. There's poverty, there's fatherless homes, there's, people being oppressed over you, whatever it is, right? The people will stand up for those groups and say there's reasons why these things happen, and there will be defenses, or we should go easy on, or we should consider these mitigating things. But when it comes to DWI, there's none of that because it's just a very political, no one is on the other side. And so it's an easy way to get good people caught up in the system. And I think you were lucky here to not, I mean, it sounds like you could have won either way, but if you had been charged, you would have had to hire an attorney. You would have had, I mean, even if you win, it costs 10 grand by the time all in, plus missing work to get to court, all these things. Even if you win, it's still a heavy burden to bear. And just looking back at what happened here. So again, there was no erratic driving, none of that. They search the car. They find basically nothing. One beer can. Nobody's going to be drunk off a beer can. I mean, it's not, maybe it's an open container ticket, but nobody, you're not going to become drunk off what they found. You made no statements about consuming any alcohol or drugs that day.
I did say that I had smoked marijuana like hours before.
Right.
Hours and hours. And I had taken a half a Xanax
Mm-hmm.
hours and hours ago.
And so
but I don't think that in either two of those things had any impairment on the way I was acting. And it had been long enough. And I wasn't misusing the amount of them.
Right.
And it's a prescription that I have.
Right.
And I mean, it's not like it was the first time I ever did it.
Right.
And I was all messed up off of it,
But I think it's important for people to know that you could have chosen not to answer the question if you had just, God forbid, in the future, whatever, you could have not, because that then sets off a thing of like, okay, now we're going to put her through tests. Now we're going to call in a DRE. Now we're going to, right. So for future.
There's a lot of pressure. I mean, when they use a lot of tactics to trick you, to scare you. And so you're just trying to tell them things to appease them.
Yeah.
But also, be truthful.
Yeah.
And you're scared.
Yeah.
And we're taught to think that police officers are people we can trust. They're there to protect and serve authority.
Respect authority. And especially, I want to say almost even more so for women. There's like, it's like ingrained in you as a woman, especially dealing with a male officer. It's like ingrained in you to try to please them and cooperate and answer and, and not stand. It's very hard. I'm not sure I could do it. So take it with no judgment. I'm not saying I could do it in the moment. When I get pulled over, my knees go weak, just like everybody else.
It's scary.
It's scary. And I think it would take a lot of fortitude to say calmly, I'm just not going to answer that question. So there's two, on the one hand, you can say, well, these are your rights. You don't have to let them search. You don't have to answer the question. But what would it really take in terms of physical fortitude to actually, to actually do it is another question.
When people where I'm from with the corruption get lawyers from, out of town or do know some laws and they try to bring them up, it aggravates the judges, the prosecutors, the policemen so much that you're sent back to your cell and your next court date is set for 10 months down the line.
So it sounds like you're saying that you feel like the system itself has there's like I want to say, so in law, we sometimes say trial tax, but like, it's almost like the judge or the prosecutor is going to give you like an additional tax, an additional fine, be worse to you, treat you worse for standing up
Yes.
for yourself. And do you
Yep.
feel that way with I mean, in terms of your own experience or friends or whatever, do you feel that way in terms of, do you feel like lawyers like me, like defense attorneys could, as a mouthpiece, stand up for, like, could stand up for you and assert, if you had a lawyer you trusted standing next to you,
Mhm.
would it make a difference?
Mhm. I think if there was enough of the great right lawyers, I mean, yeah, we could do
Yeah.
it. We could take them down. But I have spoken to a lot of lawyers. I've helped people with a lot of, criminal cases.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of lawyers in Idaho are refusing
Mm-hmm.
to take clients in, I live in Cache County and Twin Falls County, because they will go to court, they
Mm-hmm.
will defend their client, and the judge will say, "Oh, well, I don't care. Even though you're correct, I'm going to give them the sentence I
Mm.
want."
So you're
And
saying that
so,
defense attorneys almost feel like they can't, it's not that they don't
mhm,
want to stand up for you or whatever, but the system is such that they feel like almost like they can't serve you. Like, how am I going to take your money
yeah,
and know that I can't, um, that the outcome's going to be
they're
X,
just
Y, or
going to
Z.
do whatever they want,
Yeah.
no matter
And
what.
so, yeah, I mean, it's important. I think that's another thing to point out too to people is that this is why the justice system, especially in these smaller criminal cases or municipal cases, is so important. Because for most people, again, good people, I keep saying that, but for most people, this is their only contact with the system. Like, by the grace of God, most people are not going to end themselves up wrapped in, murder trial or, but most people will at some point end up in traffic court, end up with a DUI or having a loved one charged with a DUI, shoplifting, their teen daughter shoplifts, everyone's going to end up in that court setting. And the
Yes.
community should really put resources, ethical and otherwise, toward that, because it's like an overall um, trust in the system and government, because it's the only time they're going to feel it. So if you go to court on your, little traffic ticket or your little DUI and you feel it was treated unfair, you're going to assume that goes all the way up,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's going to color the
And
way you feel about the town, the government, the taxes you pay, all of it. It's going to leave a sour taste in your mouth and fairness, in general.
very much so. It's very, very corrupt where I live.
Mm,
And
mm,
there'll be children that commit crimes, or the people that commit crimes their first time,
mm-hmm,
that are probably due to some kind of traumatic event in their life. And instead of helping them or,
mm-hmm.
finding programs, they go straight to prison
Mm.
and get locked in a cage. And then they'll end up institutionalized and spend 25 to 30 years in prison.
Well, jail just
And
makes
never,
you a better criminal because
yeah,
now you have no options when you come out. Now you're gone for broke. You got no, a lot of times you're taken away from your family. You don't have those social connections or the safety net.
mhm,
And now your friends are other criminals. So
yep,
the only people are other people in jail, and that just leads to more criminality and
mhm.
recidivism and ending up back there.
The original problem that you had
Yeah.
never was resolved.
Yeah. And I want to say
And
too that
so,
that is also like uh projected even more out when you're talking about drugs and alcohol,
yep,
because you've got not only whatever trauma people might have gone through and all that, but when you're talking about DWI or other, substance use related offenses, there's a lot of lip service paid to like wanting to get people help, treatment courts and this and that. And it's like, if you just throw someone out, I mean, it's not the way to, you're not helping anybody. Eventually they're going to get out and you haven't done anything to help them deal with the issue that caused it in the first place.
mhm. And the whole, when you get in trouble, you are supposed to pay your debt to society.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody's already done 17 years in prison and you're going to send them for another 5,
Yeah.
they are not paying their debt to society at all.
No, no.
We're just paying for them.
And it's also a moment, it's paying your debt to society, but it's also a moment like a fork in the road where the powers that be are involved in your life and could try to move you toward a positive outcome, could try to
Yep.
provide treatment options,
They
could try to
could.
provide social safety nets, So it's a moment, I mean, the bad thing about getting arrested for something is that the government's in your life. The good thing is that the government's in your life. And maybe if you needed some intervention, it's a moment where you could get it, where you could take a kid that was struggling and say, let's get a social worker, let's get drug and alcohol treatment. But, that's not always the goal of the system. And, it just creates more criminals, quite frankly, and turns good people into criminals,
I see it, the effects of it on families and
Yeah.
people every day. I'm goosebumps, almost crying
You
because
can't
they
throw, you
just
can't throw people away. People are worth more than their worst day. We all are going to make a bad choice at some point. And some of us might get arrested for it. Some of us might get away with it, but we're all going to make a bad choice at some point. And,
Mhm.
it's not fair to judge people by their worst day and throw them out. That's the part people have redeeming qualities. I believe that, like, people deserve second chances, maybe even third chances. And especially when we're talking about drug and alcohol involvement, because there's a whole other layer to that is not the same as just doing something evil or bad, or this is
Yeah.
this is about being broken and
Yeah.
needing help. And it would be nice if the system could focus more on that. And in your case, just to go back to what happened, it's like here they were so quick to make assumptions about you, maybe because of how you looked, because of some medical issues, how you sounded, again because of the influence of medical issues,
Mhm.
whatever their perception in the moment, their judgments, they were quick to make assumptions and then fit things into their assumptions. So, like, for example, they're putting you through field sobriety tests. They could choose to say, she just told me she has neuropathy and she's not going to be able to do these tests. Maybe what I'm seeing has an innocent explanation, but that's not, instead they go, okay, what I'm seeing fits
Later.
my narrative, fits
Yeah.
my narrative that I came to the table with. And so that's how someone could be. And I don't want to say lucky because the right thing happened. It's not luck. You got to a place where justice seems to have worked, thank God. But you can see how easily people
Yeah.
don't have that benefit and do get charged. And I see it every day. I've represented people with seizure disorders that were having a seizure and got charged with DUI. I represented a guy, an old man who was deaf, and they took his lack of like responding to them as like, oh, he's messed up. He can't respond. The man is deaf. They even charged him with refusal because he didn't understand what they were asking him to do when they asked him to take the test.
Oh, no, that's awful. And really, it should be the officers who are
Right.
not reprimanded, but the law enforcement, they should have interpretation for him.
There should be training and experience about
Yeah.
these things. And unfortunately, listen, there is training. These standardized field sobriety tests come from NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation and
Mhm.
Safety Administration. And it says right in the manual, if someone you're supposed to ask if they have issues with their backs or legs or balance that might affect their ability to do these. And if they say they do, you actually can decide not to give those tests. And there's other options, different tests you could give instead, or not give the test at
Mhm.
all. You shouldn't take somebody who just told you that they have a medical issue that's going to prevent them from doing the test and then put them through it. Because I guarantee you, if it had gotten to the point of trial, that officer would have testified that you couldn't stand on one foot because he believed you were impaired. And he would have left out, you wouldn't even heard, that you had medical issues unless your attorney put them forward. So this is where good advocacy also comes in. I can't thank you enough for sharing the story with me. I'm so glad that it had a happy ending. Um,
So far, yes.
God willing, it will continue to. How did going through this experience, like, how are you now? I mean, do you feel like, are you nervous to drive? I hear people say they're afraid to drive sometimes after
I
they've done
am afraid to drive now
it.
because mostly if my medical condition is causing me to possibly cause an accident,
Mhm. Well, yeah,
that's my main thing. I don't want to hurt anybody else.
no, no, no,
And so if it's unsafe, I don't want to be driving.
100%.
Number one, of course. But then them knowing who I was and her, and now look, they get raises. Well, we'll get her again.
Yeah,
We'll get her
right,
this
right. We're
time for
looking for that
sure.
license plate again. Right.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a real concern, and I think people don't realize too that there's trauma, after something like this. Just that involvement with the police, being
Petrifying.
arrested, the handcuffs, the whole thing. It's traumatic. Um,
Mhm.
and it sticks with you and it scares you. And I guess ultimately, you know, that's, like I said, where our interests kind of collide, is that's just to take it back before we end, you know, the subject of what you're working on in terms of your content is really about authentically sharing these like crazy traumatic experience. Can you speak a little bit to that and how people can find it?
Um, so we live in a rural area. There's a lot of drugs and alcohol here. That's our entertainment. And we're wild and crazy. And then once the system gets their claws into you, and it's always at a young age, I call it tag and release.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be arrested, spend years and years in prison, and get an unfair case, be given a public defender who has thousands of other people that he's defending, a prosecutor who could easily be beat because he also has that huge caseload,
Mm-hmm.
but a public defender that doesn't try
Yeah,
to
no,
find
I hear you.
him.
I always say to people, because a lot of times people will call and say like they're thinking of staying with the public defender. And I always tell people, the public defenders I know are great lawyers. And it's usually not about being a good lawyer or not. They're
Mhm.
good lawyers. They mean well, they're good lawyers. And if it
Yes.
comes that the difference between, because sometimes people will say, like, I need a real lawyer, right? I'm telling you, they're real lawyers, they're great lawyers,
Yeah.
they care. The difference is exactly what you pointed out, the caseload. So the difference is a
Mhm.
private attorney like me and my firm who have the luxury of having less cases. So where I might have 30 cases at any given time, they have 1,000 or 200, or
Mhm.
depending on the county, you know. So 30 cases is a whole different ballgame. You know, it allows you to have contact with people all the time and talk to them all the time, and your staff knows who they are. And right, I mean, it just allows you more involvement in each individual case versus trying to juggle hundreds of cases. They mean well, they're good people, they're good lawyers. You can't
Yes.
go wrong with them in that sense, but they are busy, and you're not going to get maybe the level of customer service that a private firm can
Exactly.
maybe deliver. Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to raise awareness
Mm-hmm.
about the effects that it's having on families, children, our
Huge.
future,
Mm-hmm.
and also just get to know that we're funny
Love it.
and we hardly even grow potatoes in Idaho.
What? I thought that's all that happens.
Nope, very few potatoes.
Well, it's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's so meaningful. I think it's going to help a lot of people. Um, Also, you know, it's a real good what I was so excited was to dig my claws into just taking it apart, you know, because I think it really does show the problems with, you know, making assumptions about people, with not having that training be right, with, you know, ignoring medical and innocent explanations. And it just shows where that could lead. And thankfully, you know, like I said, it ended up okay for the time being in your case, but there are hundreds of other people where it did not end up okay. And maybe from hearing this, they'll feel a little freer to speak to an attorney about it, or to talk about the details, or have somebody pick it apart as we kind of just did with yours together. Because, you know, sometimes people get charged and they just feel embarrassed and they don't seek out help, whether it's from a lawyer or whether it's from family support. And they just, I mean, somebody in a case like yours might just plead guilty just because they don't want to have to spend money or talk about it. So, you know, I really do think
Just to hurry up and get it done with.
that hamster wheel, you know, and I think, so I think that this will do a lot of good. And so I appreciate it. And it really
No,
does
me
help us
too.
take apart the system too. So lastly, tell people remind them, where can they find this amazing content you're
So
working on?
it should be within the month. We have some
Now you
episodes
have
up.
reasons to get it going.
Yes.
People are going to be
Um,
looking.
we're learning the process. We have a YouTube channel. It's the Ghetto Stories of Idaho.
Love
The
it.
the Ghetto Streets of Idaho, excuse me.
Love it.
It's the stories of our people. And if you want to have lots of laughs and
We do.
hear some political things down the road,
Mhm.
well, after we feel more comfortable and brave enough to share, we will. But it's going to be fun. And
Well, definitely people should check it out. Thank you so much for sharing your story of Idaho with us and for being
yes,
brave enough to do it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
yes, thank you very much.